Hey guys, so today we are talking about Paul Rubens 48 color watercolor palette. This was sent to me by Paul Rubens, so thank you guys so much. We are going to be trying out the watercolors. We are going to be testing out the watercolor sketchbook that they sent. We're going to be swatching and color mixing, and we are going to paint a watercolor illustration to decide if these watercolors are a good fit for you and your watercolor needs. Hey guys, so you might be wondering what this half torn into package is. Why am I showing you guys this? Well, as soon as I realized what this was, I wanted to finish unpacking it with you guys. A while ago, like in October, Paul Rubens reached out to me and asked if I would be interested in taking a look at that 48 color set. Now, I've talked about Paul Rubens a lot here on the channel, mostly about their different 24 color sets and their pocket sets. So the chance to talk about a 48 color set was really interesting to me. So that is what we're doing today. This shipped through Amazon. That's why it's in Amazon packaging. And as soon as I saw it was from Paul Rubens, I immediately put it aside until I had time to actually talk about it with you guys. So let's get in here. So inside they sent a packing slip, and I will get back to you guys with prices of what this would have cost if I had paid for it. So this is their 100% cotton acid-free cold press watercolor sketchbook. They always seem to like to include sketchbooks when they send me stuff, and I appreciate that. I'm getting quite a collection though. And then we have the 48 color 5th generation artist level solid watercolor pigments palette. So this is the largest Paul Rubens palette that I have had a chance to share with you guys, and I'm really actually pretty excited about that. So the back says Paul Rubens Artist Watercolor Paint Set, 48 vibrant colors in portable box, new, made in China. This product is recommended for professional use and for ages 18 and up, or 18 plus, or wow, I cannot read today. The ADHD is clicking in strong this morning. 14 plus, 14, not 18. I agree with this warning. I'm really glad they included it. While I do think anybody at any age can learn to watercolor, I do think there are some supplies that contain toxic materials that are better suited for when you're a little bit older and you have a little bit better muscle control. Warning, prevention of accidental ingestion. This product contains colored ingredients and small components. Please make sure to keep this product out of reach of children and be careful not to swallow it. If swallowed accidentally, seek medical assistance immediately. And they also recommend that you do supervised use if you're purchasing it for children, which I really appreciate that. A lot of non-artist parents will buy art supplies for their kiddos without talking to artists or art supply reviewers or teachers to see if it's a good fit for their kid, which is fine. I love that you guys want to support your children in their artistic endeavors. I think that is fantastic. But since so many art supplies can be toxic or can have really strong fumes or can be incredibly staining, I do think it's a good idea to talk to an artist. There's plenty of us out there on the internet. You can easily find us, and artists like me love talking about art supplies with people. I used to do children's grade art supply reviews and kits here on the channel pretty dang frequently because I am a big believer in helping parents buy art supplies for their kiddos that they're going to enjoy, that they're going to get use out of, and that are going to be safe. So please do not be too proud to ask for help. Most of us would love to help you. Okay, anyway though, supervised use. If you're buying this for a younger artist, please supervise them. Do not smoke or eat during the use of the product. Be sure to wash your hands if necessary. And what they mean by that is if you get paint on your hands. Now, on the back, it does say scope of use suitable for people over 8 years old to use it. Storage methods: solid watercolor paint should be protected from prolonged exposure to direct sunlight and moisture to prevent dissolution or deterioration of the pigment. And there are 48 colors, and these are from the Youlan series. Now, my first order of business is to carefully cut these. And I'm sure my comments are going to be, full of other artists saying that they, paint with their kiddos, etc., etc. And I think that's wonderful. Like, that is exactly what I'm recommending you do. What I am not recommending is that you buy something that they've pointed you to without doing any research, they being your kids, without doing any research at all, without talking to anybody, because I mean, the internet is full of people who are intentionally trying to influence young children to buy things they don't need and spend a bunch of money. So have them show you who told them to buy. Like, share the video with me. I want to see who recommended it. All right, are you guys ready? Look how pretty this is. It has a matte finish cover and it has gold embossment. And this is the 5th generation, so it is the Youlan series. And inside is our wipe cloth. And then we have the watercolors themselves. Set that aside. Are you guys ready? I know I keep asking that. It's because I'm excited about it and it's had to sit around and wait for me. Oh, shoot. Their test swatch is printed on their sparkle iridescent paper. You guys can't see the iridescence, but I can. If you're curious about their sparkle iridescent watercolor paper, I've actually talked about it here on the channel. So I will have a bunch of fun links to more information for you guys down in the doodly-doo. Make sure you check below. And then here are our 48 colors, and it also looks like they came with 3 extra, which, okay, I love that. I have nowhere to put them in this set. However, I could at least remove the white, because I do not use white watercolors very often, the silver, and then if there is a gold, we would be in luck. Yep, and there's a gold. So actually I have 3 colors that I can remove. So these are absolutely beautiful. I will read the color names out for you guys, and I will have that written out as well as the pigment information when available in the description. And if it's not in the description, it will be linked in the description in the show notes. So make sure you check those out. I always have kind of almost like a blog post style of my review linked in the description. So the colors in this set are, starting with the 3 at the top: lemon yellow, French blue, oriental green, titanium opaque white, silver, Naples yellow, lemon yellow, cadmium yellow light, cadmium yellow medium, chromium yellow hue deep, Indian yellow, earth yellow gold, golden yellow ochre, transparent yellow. So that's the first row. Second row, chromium orange hue, cadmium orange deep, transparent orange, cadmium red light, burnt sienna, pyrrole ruby red, quinacridone rose, Purulene maroon, Venetian red, Indian red, agate brown, and what is that? This last one, Andike brown. So remember how we were just talking about some things not being appropriate for younger artists? Okay, so we have cadmium red. Cadmium is actually pretty toxic. Just having it in your watercolors is not, you'd have to consume it. It's not going to make you sick. But as an art teacher who teaches kiddos, I do have to tell kids and sometimes teens not to paint the watercolors on themselves, that it goes on the paper. And the reason I tell them not to paint it on themselves is because, like, let's be real, I don't care. I'm not their parents. If they want to paint themselves up and go home like that, you know, generally if it was safe for them to do so, I wouldn't have a problem with them expressing themselves that way. However, cadmium, not safe for you to do that. Not smart for you to do that. Your pet could lick it off of you and then they could get sick. Your skin does absorb chemicals. So, you know, just things like that make me kind of like, okay, let's keep it to the paper. So first 2 rows, second set of rows. So third row, quinacridone maroon, quinacridone magenta, quinacridone violet, cobalt turquoise, that's another one that can be toxic, transparent or translucent turquoise, cobalt blue light, another one that can be toxic, azure hue, Berlin blue, French blue, and we actually have a duplicate. Okay, these are duplicates. Okay, so I could just put these aside. Maybe they're the colors that they think are the most commonly used. Kind of appreciate them including duplicates. French blue, phthalo blue, brilliant blue violet, dioxine violet, indrathrone blue, indigo, May green, sap green, oriental green. And oriental green can sometimes be made, if it's like a true oriental green, it can actually be made with a vermilion. And sometimes that's called vermilion green. And I don't know if that's the case here, but I do know that true vermilion is incredibly toxic. And that's why we get vermilion hue instead of true vermilion. Olive green, olive green dark, cobalt turquoise dark, brown umber, Payne's gray bluish, ivory black, and lamp black. And then again, 3, these are duplicates, so if you happen to love those colors and run through them, you have 3 replacements, which is nice because it can be hard in the US to get Paul Rubens replacement colors. They also included a beautiful sparkly swatch sheet that I will be swatching on. Mine is extremely bent, so I'm going to try to, which duh, it was bent to fold in here. I'm going to try to flatten this out before I try painting on it. So my next order of operation is to start unwrapping these, and with 48 colors, that could really take a while. Let me actually pull this out real quick to make it a little easier to get the paints out. Oh, and in case you're not familiar with these kind of palettes, okay, mixing surfaces, mixing surfaces, mixing surfaces. I don't like using my palettes as my mixing surfaces. That's just personal preference on my part. You do have those though. So these are snap or friction fit. They're in there pretty tight because we have so many colors. And I do actually have some like hand and grip issues. So, you know, I may struggle with this more than your average consumer. I want to unwrap one for you guys. This is transparent yellow. So it has the, there we go, has the name on the front and the color number. It also has the pigment name as well as the light fast information, and then under here that might be the transparency or the translucency. It also lists the carrier agent, which is gum arabic. Okay, so this is just this in English. Like that. Good job, Paul Rubens. I know they've been really trying to market to a US based audience. Good job on that. So that's actually weathering resistance, which I still think is probably light fast information. And then the transparency is written out. So this one would be fully transparent. So what I'm actually going to do now that I have one free, and they'll be easier to get in and out once I have them unrobed, is I'm going to do it not even in time lapse since we have so many. I will just... Okay, I got the white one out. So this is titanium opaque white. So I'm going to transcribe the information for you guys. Also with Paul Rubens, what I like to do is I like to cut the tag off and tape it to the back using double stick tape. And that way I have all my, or almost all of my color information handy. So I will do a couple of those in time lapse and then we'll skip forward because nobody wants to watch me unwrap 48 watercolors. In case you're new here, I have show notes down in the description below, which includes the pigment information, the light fast information, and the opacity. I also link other relevant reviews in the description, as well as just videos I think you guys might be interested in watching, stuff that I think is kind of related to this. If you haven't subscribed yet, please consider doing so. YouTube analytics tells me that most of you guys are not subscribers, and it would really mean a lot to me if you took a moment and hit that subscribe button and click that bell notification so you don't miss tutorials and reviews from me. My phenomenal patrons over on Patreon will have access to this video before anybody else does, and I'm also going to share the line art from the field test that I create with them over there. So you can join me at patreon.com/nattosoup. Really struggled to get all of these paints out of the palette. They're in there very tightly, and I also struggled to get some of the wrappers off some of these paints. And here is the trash from unwrapping these. I was able to reuse a lot of the wrapper to label the paints themselves. .48 colors is a lot of watercolors to unwrap. That took a while. Some of them are so sticky, so hydrophilic, that I could not get the paper off just yet. So this is what all 48 of them look like. I did rearrange a few colors and went ahead and denoted generally where they were rearranged from so that I will remember when we're swatching. So next, I want to go ahead and swatch on the provided sparkle paper. You guys still can't see the sparkle. It's such a shame. Some of these things are just so much prettier in day-to-day real life than they are on camera. So I'm gonna use my little Daiso washi tape holder and go ahead and tape this down, and we can start swatching. So guess what sucks? I changed the order of these a little bit. These have the color number, but not the color name. And guess what I wrote down? The color name, not the color number. So I'm gonna have to do a little bit of thinking to figure out just where I need to swapsies my colors. And, you know, don't necessarily want to have to do a whole lot of thinking, but I will do it. I will do it for you, and I will do it for me, and then we can get to swatching. So Paul Rubens is usually pretty hydrophilic. That means it loves water, and generally I do not need to pre-activate Paul Rubens paints because they tend to turn soupy when I do that. Believe me, I have reviewed plenty of Paul Rubens paints, tongue twister there, here on the channel, so I'm pretty familiar with that. So I'm gonna figure this out, and then we can start swatching. It's a little bit frustrating how when you move just a few paints, it really changes where everything is when they provide their own swatch sheet. So I went ahead and labeled it. My handwriting is absolutely atrocious, but this is mostly for me to be able to follow along, not necessarily for thee to be able to follow along. And I'm going to do my best not to screw it up, because as I mentioned earlier, I'm having kind of an ADHD day today. So to make this a little easier on me, I'm going to go ahead and swatch the colors that I moved, and then theoretically, I should just be able to go in order from there. As I mentioned before, I have reviewed a lot of Paul Rubens paints, and I know that these don't actually need a whole lot of pre-activation, that if you pre-activate them, sometimes they can start to turn soupy. So I did not pre-activate these, and the colors activate almost immediately, which is why I typically recommend Paul Rubens for travel painters, because they wake up and activate so quickly. They also discolor the water very quickly as well. So if you're working with a single pot, you're going to need to do some frequent changes. I like the color selection in this palette a lot, and so far I feel like it'd be very suitable for illustration and comics, which is not something I get to say often, but it brings me joy to be able to say it. Now, one of the reasons I think this might be great for comic artists, myself included, is that these are fairly affordable for a 48 color set, especially compared to many popular Western brands. They're also very finely granulated, which works out well for tiny little faces painted over and over again. You also get a lot of pre-mixed convenience colors, which when you are painting 20 pages with multiple panels a page, or hundreds of pages with multiple panels a page, it really starts to add up. So these convenience colors can be really handy. My only real problem is that the gold, silver, and white are extremely unimpressive. You really can't see them very well. They don't have a lot of oomph or coverage. Another wonderful thing about these colors is that they do not shift or desaturate as they dry, which has gotten pretty unusual with less expensive watercolors. I have reviewed so many. I love that these keep their saturation. And here's a little look at all 48 of our colors. We've got some beautiful earth tones. We've got some really nice reds. We've got some fantastic blues. We've got some great pre-mixed greens. So pretty much most of the colors you're going to want if you're painting watercolor comics or illustrations. Well, that turned out to be an intelligence test. Hopefully I passed it. So the colors have dried on the sparkly paper. I really wish the camera did a better job picking up the sparkly. It's kind of subtle, but it still shows through the paint, and it's really pretty. So for those of you who are into card making or bookmark making or anything that involves a like physical original piece, or even if you're doing prints at home, this could be a beautiful paper for that. And I do actually have, like I said, a review where I talk about it more in depth. So make sure you check that out. So now I want to try out the sketchbook that they included. Here we go. It is cotton pulp cold press, 300 GSM or 140 pounds. And there's 20 sheets in here. So what I'm going to be doing with this today is mostly just swatching the colors on it. And since this is shrink wrapped, I will get it started. Now, when it comes to watercolor sketchbooks, I generally prefer them larger and cheaper, like the Canson XL, just because, you know, I always get stuck in my own head with nice sketchbooks like this. Like if I make a mistake, then I'm ruining it. So for me, it kind of creates some performance anxiety. Also, I personally prefer spiral binding. Put that down for a sec. And remove the belly band. And inside, so this is kind of moleskin-esque. We have our strap to hold it open. We have a pocket. And I believe we have a ribbon. So if you're a fan of moleskin style sketchbooks and you're looking for a nice watercolor travel sketchbook, the Paul Rubens one might be exactly what you're looking for. It does have perforated pages too. So you know how I was talking about like that fear of messing up and fear of the blank page? Well, if you mess up, you can pull it out. And it's a pretty decent size to use for watercolor postcards. Now, the question is, can I swatch all or almost all 48 colors on this? We will find out together. This paper has a lovely texture. I'm going to try my wet into wet test on it. It's very assertive, very standard textured cold press cotton rag watercolor paper. So if you enjoy a watercolor paper with a very assertive texture, this is a good one for you. This texture brings out some of the beautiful granulation in these colors. It's like a beautiful pebbly texture while wet. However, I don't feel like it would be very suitable for people who like to work with very fine ink details unless you're working with a micron. Or for people who draw teeny tiny little faces where this kind of granulation might be a little bit distracting. The elastic band on this book does a good job of holding the paper in place even while the paper is fairly wet. I mean, seriously, look how gorgeous these colors are on this paper. Look at that beautiful pebbly texture. If you are a fan of texture, if you love what texture does to your watercolor, this is a good paper for you. And these paints are just gorgeous and luminous, particularly while they're still wet on this paper. As these dry, we do lose some of that beautiful luminosity that comes from like water and pigment on paper, but they dry fairly true to color. I really like what the texture of this paper does to these paints. It adds a really pretty granulation and additional texture to it. I want to try doing a wet into wet test on this paper. But next, we are going to move on to the paper that I always use for these tests, Blick Premier's 100% cotton watercolor paper. So this is the paper that I use for pretty much all of my watercolor tests. It is basically the standard. I had to start a new pad since all of the pads that I currently have are the smaller 9x12, and I needed the space to swatch all 48 colors. So what I want to do is we've got, like I said, 48 colors to swatch. So we have got a lot, we need a lot of room. Now, if you are new here, hi, hello, welcome. The way I like to swatch watercolors is I like to do a mass tone swatch, and then I like to do a blended out color swatch. I'm trying to make sure I have room on the paper for all 4 rows. And then after I swatch my watercolors, I like to do color mixing, both optical as well as atomic. And I also like to do what I call a wet into wet test, but we'll go through that in a bit. And my math today is atrocious. I did not leave even room for these 4 lines, but that's all right. Hopefully I can make it work. So I'm going to do a mass tone swatch and then a blended out gradient swatch, and hopefully that will show us if there's any granulation or interesting color effects with these watercolors. So something to keep in mind about Paul Rubens is these are really hydrophilic watercolors. So when they get wet, especially if water sits on the pans, they can get very cakey. And that's something I am noticing as I am swatching on the Blick, because I just literally did 2 swatches in a row and this is my 3rd. The colors are very finely milled, but some of the blues seem to run quite a bit when water is added, flooding the wash. Something I've noticed from my experience with Paul Rubens, kind of regardless of the grade, is that these are very finely milled. They do seem to contain a lot of oxgall or synthetic oxgall, and they move a lot, which can give you some beautiful misty effects, but it can also flood a wet into wet wash like this. That does mean though that 2 color wet into wet mixes are going to mix beautifully, and you're going to get some interesting effects, and hopefully you guys will see that when we do the field test. I do apologize that I am just a smidgen off camera over here. Sometimes it can be hard to frame up my shots, especially when I have to pull my camera way back so you guys can see everything that I'm doing. But I do think it's important to include shots where you can actually see me dipping the brush into the pans so you can see how I'm handling the paint, and that way you can decide if this is a good fit for you. I try to do as much testing as possible to help you guys decide what paints are right for you before you spend that money. So while this is drying, we're going to do color mixing. We're going to do 2 types of color mixing. We're going to do optical mixing and we're going to do atomic mixing, and hopefully that'll give you guys a good idea of how these paints handle. I'm going to start by laying down some lines for my optical, there we go, my optical color mixing. So we're going to do our cool yellow, our warm yellow, our cool red, our warm red, our cool blue, our warm blue. Theoretically, you could be able to mix almost any color you want with just these 6 colors. I actually did a video years ago with the Daniel Smith mixing set to show that that is pretty much the case, but it does take some color theory and it takes a while longer. So I'm going to let that dry while we work on our atomic, which is where we take 2 colors and we smash them together to make a secondary color. I noticed that the blues seem to have slightly weaker mixing strength than reds and the yellows, and I couldn't seem to mix a good Payne's gray. That's a little bit later on. Now there is a Payne's gray in this set, but I like to be able to mix them. It brings something a little bit different to the table. Now we have loads of beautiful colors here, but I do think being able to mix your own custom mixes is important. It allows you to dial in what you're looking for. So I do think atomic color mixing is an important part of the testing process. And also sometimes you want to adjust colors just so, or you're looking for specific properties. So as for our optical, I got a lot of reactivation with the yellow. The Berlin blue doesn't quite cover the first yellow. They're streaking along the edges, but in general, these seem to glaze okay. And we're going to see if these get dusty and musty as they dry out. So I guess I recorded the drying before I recorded the second part of the optical mixing. So now you guys can kind of see how, even though I tried to give it a good amount of time to dry out, we're still getting some reactivation. With Paul Rubens though, generally you can do lots of layers with them without too much reactivation unless you want reactivation by adding in lots of additional water. My optical blending test, or my optical color mixing test, is taking a while to dry. It's actually cooler here in Louisiana finally, and although the humidity has dropped, because it is cooler, it's taking longer for things to kind of evaporate out. So while I wait for this to finish drying, and it's causing some paint reactivation, it's kind of making things a little bit weird anyway, I'm going to put this aside. Now, normally I would do the wet into wet test on the Blick, but I really kind of like how the Paul Rubens sketchbook is handling, and I kind of want to put it to a little bit more of a test. So I've got a fresh sheet here, and if you're new, the wet and wet test is pretty simple. We are going to saturate the paper with water, and then we're going to dab in color and just kind of see what it does. So I like that this is a nice, fairly sturdy 120 pound. So, you know, if I were working with it not in a sketchbook, I might want to stretch it or secure it somehow. You might want to use clips on this one. Let's see how well the elastic holds it. But it should take paper decently well, and I really love that it has a very assertive texture. All right, so I've got it all saturated. And then I can just start adding in color. We can see how much the color moves. It seems like this has like a decent amount of maybe oxgall or a synthetic oxgall in it, because the color is moving quite a bit. And that's not a bad thing or a good thing. It's just a property to kind of pay attention to and to notice. It might be something you love. It might be something you find frustrating. Beautiful thing about watercolor is that all of us as watercolor artists, look how much that moves. Isn't that pretty? All of us work differently. We all want different things out of our paints. We're all looking for different properties. And that's one of the reasons why reviews can be really helpful, is it can give you a chance to see how paints handle. That's the cadmium run, I believe. It can give you a chance to see how the paints handle before you spend, you know, what might be a significant amount of money. Now, one of the things I typically like about Paul Rubens is it's a pretty decent quality brand. I'm pretty happy with it. I've reviewed a lot of Paul Rubens over the years, but it's also fairly affordable. It's a Chinese brand, and their main source of distribution currently is on Amazon. I used to buy it from AliExpress as well, but they have a pretty sizable Amazon presence. And frankly, if you're in the US, not that I am suggesting, hey, buy from Amazon, but if you are going to get Paul Rubens, Amazon might be the better way to do it so that you're avoiding paying extra in tariffs. And I will point out again that these were sent to me, so it's not really a review from me. This is kind of like a let's take a look at these. But I have also purchased a lot of Paul Rubens over the years. So if you're interested in like a review like that, I do have some of those that I'll link for you guys. This will be the cobalt blue. At least tonight, the paper seems to hold on to the water decently well as well. It's not all just evaporating off the surface. We are getting some pretty blends and diffusion. So this paper could be really fun if you like doing a lot of wet into wet. So if you are the sort of artist who likes to do maybe like atmospheric, really loose landscapes or sunsets, cloudscapes, that sort of thing, this might be a good paper for you. Now, my background is I am a watercolor comic artist and watercolor illustrator. I make the comic 7-inch Kara, which is all watercolor, and you can read it at 7inchkara.com. It's an all ages comic, but the main demographic is younger readers. The main character, Kara, is a 7-inch tall, hence 7-inch Kara, Lilliputian girl who discovers a huge family secret and sets out on a big adventure to meet humans for the first time. So it's about, I would say, 300 plus pages of watercolor comic. So a lot of painting there. And then I'm also a watercolor illustrator as well as an art educator. And I have been reviewing watercolor supplies for, let's see, I started reviewing comic supplies, so inking supplies and pencils primarily, and then alcohol markers when I worked as a convention artist. and then I added in watercolor. So at least 10 years. Not all of it was on YouTube, some of it was on a blog. So really pretty. I don't want to overwork it because I am very curious about how much these will move as the paper dries and tightens up. I'm also interested to see if we're going to get, you see how we have a line up there where the colors have dried and then the rest of the paper is still wet. Kind of curious if we're going to get kind of uneven drying. The paints on this paper though are beautiful, and we have some really beautiful kind of misty techniques going on. I'm just gonna soak up this extra water and then we'll move into hyperlapse so we can see how the paint and the paper change as they dry. I am impressed that the elastic band did a good job holding it, you know, decently tight. It does want to buckle up, but it hasn't. The elastic band is holding it in place, so that's nice to see. All right, let's head on over into hyperlapse. We have a whole lot of saturated color going on here, and it's really nice to see that as these dry, we don't lose most of that color. We're still keeping a lot of the color. So the 48 color Paul Rubens set handles very in keeping with what I've come to expect from Paul Rubens quality. The colors activate immediately. They are bright and brilliant. They do very well when it comes to atomic mixing. Optical mixing, it can be a little bit more dicey, but that's why we're going to put these through a field test at some point. I love the color selection in this set with the exception of 3 colors. I don't really use white when it comes to watercolor. That's a personal preference. I prefer to use white gouache. And I don't really care for the 2 included metallics in this set. But with 48 colors, it's not like I'm missing out on anything that I would have really preferred. The colors are bright and brilliant, and I think this set could be a really good affordable option for an illustrator or a watercolor comic artist, somebody who needs to be able to paint pretty much everything and may want these convenience colors pre-mixed to make their job easier. Because when you're painting 24 watercolor comic pages in a batch, you need things to be easier. So I am going to field test this. I actually have a sketch of this cute elf girl. I'm feeling the Renaissance fair spirit. It is that time of year here in Louisiana. And I wanted to test out the adorable little sketchbook with this sketch. So that is my plan for that. But if you're looking for maybe a more straightforward Paul Rubens field test, I recently reviewed the Paul Rubens floral set, which they also sent to me. I love the colors in that. And I painted a beautiful bouquet with that. And I also have an illustration of a Lilliputian girl surrounded by flowers in the style of my Mare Marie Blue field test that I'm going to use the floral set on as well, just to see how well it mixes skin tones. So if you are looking for more Paul Rubens goodness, make sure you check the description below, and I'll see you guys with the time-lapse field test. I'm breaking in a new palette. I like to make a palette map that allows me to see what my colors look like, and it allows me to select my colors quickly and easily. Yes, they did include a swatch sheet, but I like kind of a one-to-one color map like I'm making here. And this is on a scrap of cotton rag paper. So it's very similar to the paper that I generally use when I'm painting with watercolor. Today is a little different. Usually I would use Arches for my field test. Today I'm actually using the included Paul Rubens pad, and I went ahead and just sketched directly on it and inked on top of it, and I had no real issues. I just want to remind you guys that this line art is available for you to print and color yourself if you are one of my patrons over on Patreon. So to no one's surprise, once this paper gets wet, it stays wet for a while, which can really make for lovely diffused wet into wet paper. So this paper stays open for a while. You just have to make sure you step away for a while to let it dry and close up when you want to start adding in details or bringing in layering. I did not use the elastic strap for support, but I did use Chinese watercolor weights for a while. But impressively, the paper does an all right job of supporting itself even after it's saturated. underrated. The texture is very pronounced. Some might even say it's patchy or blocky, which might not work well for tiny detailed faces, but is lovely for looser, more atmospheric landscapes or for floral or fruit studies. And this is why I did a larger face here, something that could take that granulation and it not look too muddy. The paints themselves are pretty par for Paul Rubens. They're very easy to activate to the point where you might pick up too much paint, so color control is important. They're fairly easy to mix, and there are lovely colors that blend well and mix well. In general, I like most of Paul Rubens' paints, and I think they're an excellent professional grade option. I think the colors in this set are well chosen, although there's a heavy emphasis on blues. And I don't really feel like I'm missing or lacking anything. Maybe an Opera Rose. The floral set I recently reviewed has that though, but Opera Rose is pretty fugitive. The Naples yellow is more like a yellow ochre than a warm buttery yellow, but the inclusion of a warm transparent yellow kind of makes up for that. And I love that we get a cobalt turquoise, a cobalt blue, and a French ultramarine. Our selection of blues is honestly great. The weakest colors in this set for me are the white, the silver, and the gold. I don't use titanium white very often. I actually prefer to either like leave the white of the paper still visible if I want that kind of a white highlight, or mix colors lighter, or to use white gouache rather than to use an included titanium white. And the silver and gold are just both incredibly weak. But these aren't colors that I would find myself using often anyway. So all in all, I was very satisfied with how this palette handled for the field test. But that's actually one of the reasons why I generally say yes when Paul Rubens reaches out and asks if I'd be interested in taking a look at one of their palettes, is that I have purchased so many Paul Rubens palettes over the years to review. In general, I am very impressed with their quality. So I think it's generally a knock out of the park. Now, that said, I purchase and review a lot of American-made watercolors. So if you're looking to support a local or a US-owned business, make sure you check out my professional watercolor reviews, because I've reviewed all of the big brands from Da Vinci to Cheap Joe's, which is Da Vinci, to Daniel Smith. So hopefully you guys will check that out as well if you're looking for some other alternatives. But I think that Paul Rubens really brings something very nice to the table. These are affordable, professional grade watercolors that are very easy to use. One downside is that you can run through these very quickly because they activate so quickly and so easily. You can end up kind of wasting paint or overusing it. So I do recommend, when you're working with Paul Rubens, having some sort of palette to help with color control. But honestly, I think these are great paints. They are very fun to paint with. They handle the way I want. I am actually, as I'm narrating this, I'm working on the larger Paul Rubens floral set field test of a Lilliputian girl surrounded in a field of flowers. So this is actually very fresh for me. I am literally in the middle of finishing that up. And just in general, I'm very happy with how Paul Rubens handles. I think they are a great set if you're looking to get into watercolor. As I probably mentioned earlier, I would not recommend Paul Rubens for younger artists just because of the toxicity of some of the colors and also the color handling. It requires a little bit of experience to get used to that. But I think this is an excellent set for, an adult artist or a college-age student who would like to get into watercolor. I think it's very accessible, and I think the color selection is great. I actually don't have a problem with people starting with convenience colors when they're starting watercolors, because really you just want to have a good experience with watercolor. You want to enjoy watercolor. You want it to be fun and fulfilling, and if you're spending a lot of time mixing colors and feeling frustrated, that is not going to do that for you. I do think, developing color theory and color mixing skills as you go along is important, but I don't think you have to start with a 6-color set if you find that thought intimidating, or if you're worried that you'll be able to mix the kind of colors you want. And I say this as a very different kind of watercolor artist. Like I said, I'm a watercolor comic artist, so I actually started with student grade convenience sets like Cotman's large set when I first started 7-inch Cara, and then started reviewing watercolors and started upgrading from there and sharing my experiences with other people. So my opinion comes from a very different viewpoint than traditional watercolorists. And I think it's, a valid opinion, because there are a lot of illustrators and comic artists who enjoy watercolor and traditional media. So this was a lot of fun to paint and a lot of fun to paint with. The paper is a joy. I'm gonna have to make myself use this sketchbook though, because it is so nice and I tend to get intimidated, but hopefully I can push myself to do more field tests like this in the sketchbook, because like I said, the paper is lovely and it handles well for larger subject matter like this, or subject matter that is looser. Also, it does not ripple as much as one might expect it to, and I really appreciate that as well. So these are fairly expensive compared to other Paul Rubens painting kits and other common Amazon watercolors at $89.99 at the time of recording, and this price came from Amazon, and I will have a link for you guys. The set that's one step down, so it's like the pink tin with 48 colors, is $69.99. And then there's one that is $62.99 that I really like the palette for that one. It's really colorful and very cute. And I'm not entirely clear on what the differences are. Amazon and Paul Rubens don't really explain why one set is better than the other. And I only have the regular 24 color set from a few years ago and this year's 24 color floral set, so it's not like I can really do an apt one-to-one comparison to try and suss it out. It does seem though like there are some color differences between the palettes, so it really could be differences in the pigments, and since some pigments are more expensive than others, that might be the price difference there. I just wish Paul Rubens would make that really clear. I also really like their Mei Liang watercolors. I've talked about them here on the channel. Those are their student grade watercolors, and they have a set of 52 colors in a beautiful tin for $32.38 on Amazon. So in general, I really like Paul Rubens products. Now, one of the downsides is that the colors get soupy fast, so water control is important with these. You may have to handle them a little bit differently than other Western style watercolors. The sketchbook isn't usually included with this palette, but it is for sale, and I do like it. The paper has an assertive texture, and it may not be good for delicate painting, particularly if you're struggling with fine brush control, but it might make a wonderful plein air and travel sketchbook. So let's talk about the pros and cons. It's unclear why this particular 48 color palette is more expensive than their other 48 color palettes. I think that's just like kind of an advertising and branding problem that I think Paul Rubens could easily clear up with a little more information. And the refills are not as accessible in the US as other brands. So if you fall in love with this, it can be hard to get a hold of their half pans. The pros are that this set has some lovely colors. They are very mixable with good saturation, and they have a nice color selection. I think this set would be a great fit for comic artists and for people who like to paint tiny little faces, because the colors are very smooth. You have a great selection, and you have some wonderful neutrals in there for painting skin tones. So this would definitely be a set that I recommend to my other watercolor comic artists. These are also quick to activate, which could mean that Paul Rubens would be a great option for field work because you're not struggling to get your watercolors to wake up. It's also fairly affordable when compared to many US and Western professional grade watercolor brands like Daniel Smith or Sennelier. So this can be a great way to upgrade your paints if you're ready for an upgrade. This set came with a few duplicates to refill since refills can be harder to find, and it's a quality tin to hold your paint. It's going to stand up to a lot of wear and tear, so it's already a great start for watercolor painting. Not that I'm necessarily recommending this palette for beginner watercolors. Again, I mentioned that I really like their Mei Liang watercolors, and I'm not necessarily recommending this palette for younger watercolor artists because there are several colors that are quite toxic in this set. But again, Mei Liang, really good. Watch the video. It's from a few years ago, but I really like their watercolors. I really enjoyed working with these watercolors. Now, that's not really a surprise. I like Paul Rubens in general. I like their watercolors, and I think they deliver a pretty decent product at a very fair price, especially here in the US, where art supplies can be kind of price prohibitive. I'm not really clear though why this set, which is $89, is an upgrade on some of their other 48 color sets other than some color differences. So if you know, let me know down in the comments. I also really enjoyed the cottonrag watercolor sketchbook that they included. It has a very assertive paper, but it takes water and pigment very well. So I hope today was helpful, useful, and informative for you guys. If you are one of my patrons, I have shared the line art for this illustration over on Patreon, so you can print it out and color it along if your heart so desires. And I look forward to seeing you guys again really soon with an art demonstration, an art supply review, or a tutorial. I hope you guys have a wonderful day. Bye guys!